Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's Thursday Morning Live. And this morning, I am excited about my guest, Michael Zhao, joining us from Southern California. We're going to talk about real estate, multifamily real estate, mortgages. We're going to talk about the state of where the world's at and what our predictions are, or what we think the world's going to go financially over the next few months. Um, Welcome this morning. If you are new to the show, well, I'm glad that you're here. Please follow us. Go out to LinkedIn and uh, um, Instagram and Twitter and like us, love us, follow us on YouTube. You can subscribe and you'll get notified on any one of those platforms whenever we go live. We do a pop up or we have one of our scheduled events. So we have a number of scheduled events throughout the week and like to bring you relative content and some information. So what I'm going to do this morning is bring our guest in and ask a little bit about him and get started. Hey, Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Mike, from
How's it
San
going today?
Diego.
San Diego, Southern California. What's it like in San Diego today?
Well, it's still dark where I'm at right now, but it's always beautiful. I have a few in-person appointments, surprisingly, today, so I'm going out, and it's going to be just like regular San Diego, boring, 75 degrees and sunny.
Man, oh man. Listen, I wouldn't call that boring, that's for sure. No bugs, you don't have to have screens in your windows. It's always 72 degrees. Come on.
It's
Hey,
it, it's a
Michael,
blessed life.
uh, give the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do and a little background.
Sure. So I started out back in the 90s. I just graduated from college and I had been serving in Christian ministry with young people. And I couldn't find a job at that time. It was in the mid 90s. And so I got a job as a debt collector,
Hmm.
making phone calls, calling people, and then became a top debt collector for that company. And a few months later, after being a top debt collector for that company, a buddy of mine called me who was a colleague of mine and said, "Hey, I got a job for you." He goes, "Well," I said, "What's that?" "It'll pay more, and instead of collecting it, you get to give it out." I said, "What's that?" "Well, you get to be a loan officer." And that was also in the 90s, by the way. And so I interviewed for it, and it was at a thrift and loan. If you can imagine that, those aren't around anymore.
Yeah,
And
right.
so I've been in mortgage lending as a loan officer, starting at a thrift and loan since 1996, and then moving on from a thrift and loan to a mortgage broker, and then during the crash of the mid 2000s, I ended up working for some retail mortgage companies, and now I'm in regular mortgage lending.
And in the mortgage lending business, are you on the residential side or the commercial side?
I've been in residential. Of course, I've done some commercial loans. However, my specialty is in residential mortgage lending.
Okay.
And also, I should add that it wasn't until the mid 2000s, not at the beginning part, but in the mid 2000s, that I actually invested into real estate. So I'm also, not only am I an active um, mortgage broker, but also an active real estate investor as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll get into that a little bit. Here's what I'd like to know. Being that you've been in the mortgage business since the early 2000s, I'm sure that you've seen a couple of cycles, ups and downs, kind of if we were to look at a graph, right? Tell us a little bit about what you've seen and what you see today market wise.
Well, that's a loaded question because I think in the past, so I remember a few old codgers would tell me, well, the market changes every 7 years, right? So I entered into 96 and then the market changed in 98 with a minor bond crisis. And then from 1998 till about 2005 to 7, of course, we saw market fluctuation, and it changed from 2008 for a few years in a down cycle. And so I always thought that, hey, 2015, it's going to end. 2018, it's going to end. And then when COVID hit, oh, for sure, it's going to end. right? I was on that bandwagon for a while. But then I came across a few economists. My degree's in economics from San Diego State. And we began to look together at some, not only some economic numbers, but also on some sociological numbers. I looked at birth patterns. I looked at migration rates. I looked at how people were living. So I was using Harry Dent for a while to kind of use as a gauge as an economist. Logan Mohtashami is an economist with Housing Wire, lead economist there. Bear Habib is also a mortgage professional who also does a lot of economic reports as well. And when you look at the birth patterns as well as the employment patterns, you get to see how the demand for real estate is happening. And you can look statistically when you have birth patterns that coincide with the what they call the first-time buyer and the move-up buyer, then over the course of the last 40 years, it's shown how the market has demand for housing. On top of that, you want to be looking at the 10-year Treasury on the type of demand on as a foundation of inflation, right? We've seen a lot of people are talking about hyperinflation, what's going to happen, so on and so forth. But we still see the 10-year Treasury below 2%.
Hang on one second. So
Sure.
Let's back up for a minute. Go back to
Sure.
the birth pattern comment.
Sure.
Okay. This stuff fascinates me, and I like Moshami, and I love the CEO of Marcus Millichap and the guy at Walker Dunlop. I think that, I'm not an economist, but I listen to this because you really kind of want to try and stay ahead of the curve if you can. If you're in sales on the real estate side, if you're doing mortgages, where's your buyer coming from? And you talked about the birth rate and the patterns in migration. Go back and talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's really a key point.
Well, sure. Let's talk about that just for in the current market right now. So if you go back into the 70s, landmark court case. Oh no, I've said it so many times. Roe versus Wade and the freedom of choice. Okay, and if you look at that as a landmark court case, we began to see birth patterns as a recorded statistic begin to decline from the mid 70s into the early 80s. Okay, and if you add 30 years for the first-time buyer from 1975 to 1980, so add 30 years to 1980, it just happens to coincide from 1975 to 1980. Add 30 years to that for the first-time buyer cycle, it very much coincides with the real estate crash of 2007, right? Look at that. You have a decline in birth patterns, and then you also which means that you have a decline in first-time buyer pool. So when you have increased inventory, reduced buyer pool, regardless of the lending environment that was going to happen at that time, as a very simple socioeconomic statistic, you were going to have reduced buyer pool, and then as a result of increased lending in 2002 and increased building as a result of that lending, you're going to have more inventory than supply was going to have as far as buyer pool was concerned, which was and so everything exacerbated into one big mess in 2007 as a result of increased inventory, the takeaway of irresponsible lending products, and then decreased supply of buyers available, right? And as soon as you go into 1985, when birth patterns began to increase, that's when you're going to find today that the increased buyer pool in as far as buyers across the entire United States, the increased buyer pool as a result of birth patterns, adding 30 years to that, between the first time buyer is going to be between 28 to 35 years old. And once you bring that into play, you're going to have increased demand for housing.
And so I get that, but let's talk about this, because you talk about a decrease in birth pattern. But if you look back and you look at the baby boomers, right? Even today, as much as today, you still have 10,000 people a day turning age 65 for the next 5 to 6 years. So you still have this wave of people. So where are those people going? They're going to warmer climates, places where there's no taxes, there's better lifestyle, a little bit better base of economy, right? So where are they going? They're going to places like Florida and Texas and Tennessee and the southern states, right?
Mhm.
So, I'm interested in the piece you were talking about. Look at the birth patterns in 1985 in correlation to where we're at today or
Sure.
then. Where so talk about that.
Sure. So it's a sideways maneuver, right? If you live in a house right now, and it doesn't matter what your age is, you could be 25 or you could be 65, or you could be 85 for that matter. You're making a sideways move. You're going from one house to another house. And what I have personally noticed is that although it's easy for people to sell their home, in in the fact of what they read on the news and in the fact of how they want to transfer their wealth, they're not selling their homes. They're keeping their homes as an asset to rent. They're keeping their homes and delivering them to their heirs, right? And so if you're between the age of 65 to 85, unless you don't have any heirs that you wish to deliver your property to, then you're more than likely to sell the home. And even if you're moving to Florida, even if you're moving to Southern California, Arizona, or just another area to retire to, there's a higher probability of making a sideways maneuver. You're not creating any more inventory because you're looking to buy or acquire more inventory for yourself, because it was out of that, in my belief, it is out of that. If you're a baby boomer, you're a generation out of the Great Depression where you believed in paying off your mortgage and buying property with no debt, because it was a fear-based model to where you were afraid of getting foreclosed upon or losing your house or even having debt, because having debt was just a necessary evil out of other than paying cash for property.
Definitely an interesting dynamics. So let's just take a forward look in your opinion of where do you think that we're headed. So right now we're in this world where things really seem accelerated. You got P&Es in the stock market that are out of whack. You've got real estate pricing that doesn't meet standard or typical fundamentals. You got cap rate compression. You've got interest rates coming back up. It's almost like we're headed for a perfect storm. Hey, listen, I didn't fare very well in 2008, right? When the markets hit a wall and over the next few months unraveled. But where do you see us going today in, maybe in relation to history? And I know history doesn't predict the future, but there are some things to watch out for.
Sure. Well, first of all, as I alluded to before, there are still people looking to buy between the ages of 25 to 38 years old, and that's more of a known fact. But we just looked at yesterday if you look at yesterday or just the last week, and you don't have to be a genius or an economist to figure out that if you go onto the internet and look at any of the housing sites that are out there, that there is a limited amount of inventory.
Right.
I just drove over this past weekend. I drove from San Diego into Texas, and I was in every town that I was in along that 10 freeway. I was looking at properties, and there's just limited amount of inventory. You can go to any area, and it's less than two hands of amount of properties that are listed in any given zip code. And when you have that limited amount of inventory, it doesn't matter the location that you're in. When you have that limited of inventory and the amount of people that have a willingness to purchase property, that's called demand. When you have that demand, it's going to continue. And I just wrote a piece, and I put it on my LinkedIn page actually, on how based upon that, and also based upon how I think the trend for the 10-year Treasury is in relation to how mortgage bonds are going to continue. I think that mortgage interest rates, and I'll go back to demand here in a second. I think that mortgage interest rates are going to drop, and it's very contrary to that. But I think that that demand, and even though we have rising interest rates currently, I think we're going to see a drop in rates in the future. I think that demand for jobs is still going to be high, even though the number came out this morning that there's more people that are filing for unemployment. I think that we're still going to have jobs that are going to be available, and that type of income and the demand for housing, because we still have another 5 more years of, remember, going back to the birth patterns of the 80s, we still have 5 more years of increased demand. So increased demand, plus the builders aren't built. They didn't decide, hey, we're going to build more. They're riding this profitability high as they are able to take it, because they're also up against an increased inflationary cost for their labor and materials as well. They don't want to get caught to that. So if you're a businessman, you don't overbuild just because you think you're taking advantage of it, because it does take an 8 to 24 month landing pattern for new construction.
It's interesting.
So I think that we're going to see continued demand, and people are talking about 15% demand in some high areas. I think we're going to see between 5 to 10% higher than that. I think we're going to see 25 to 30% increase in prices in certain areas. And unfortunately, the limited supply is going to cause some very unhealthy gains in real estate prices, not only in single family, but also multifamily and beyond in this upcoming year.
It's interesting where things are at and where we've come from, right? I mean, I've been in the business 30 years, and it's as simple as this. I remember when I first got in the business, there was a one-page contract, right? That's how you listed somebody's house. Now today there's 20 forms to fill out just to put a house on the market. And, it's the same thing with the mortgage business. And you watch interest rates. I used to do commercial deals on the LIBOR, right? So it'd be LIBOR +2 or LIBOR +3. Interest rates were pretty favorable. How does that compare today against the 10-year? And what does that look like if somebody's doing it like that today?
Well, we've seen interest rates increase a lot. It was just 6 months ago that interest rates were in the mid-2s, and now we're in the mid-3s, and climbing on regular mortgage interest rates right now. And so I think that if you're a mortgage originator or if you're a real estate agent, it's easy to look at the unknown and say the sky is falling based upon what you see today. And so, but if you're looking at the longer term trend on where Treasury yields have been headed in the United States, it's still been coming down over the course of the last few years, as we've already seen. And I would think that that if you are an international buyer, okay, I'm going to bring this to play just for a moment here. Just go with me on this, right? And if for example, Japan and negative rates, and in the EU, you still have lower yields, and the United States, which has a hot housing market and has a great economy with economic numbers to support it, okay, and you're looking at rising yields, I think that the American Treasury, whether it's the 10-year Treasury or whether it's the 30-year mortgage bond, is looking pretty attractive right now. And if you're a yield hunter, eventually those yields are going to hit to the point to where, we got to buy that stuff. Right. Why? Because it's producing really well for us right now. And so as they buy American dollars in the form of either A, treasuries, or B, mortgage-backed securities, that demand is going to fill in, and eventually those yields are also they're going to have to drop, because those yields, it just doesn't make sense if you're an institutional buyer of securities that you just got to buy those higher yields because they're producing better than international yields.
Let me ask you this: what do you think? What do you think the outlook is for the passive investor, the private investor looking to place money in a real estate offering, right, as an alternative investment to the stock market today? What do you think the outlook is for that investor?
If you're shopping on price, then it's going to be super challenging. I think that if you're a first-time passive investor, in other words, you haven't invested into real property before, you're just kind of dipping in to look at it, you're going to get you're unfortunately stuck in that same pattern as the first-time buyer. You have limited inventory. overpaying in certain circumstances, right? Or buying something that maybe you wouldn't live in, but on paper the numbers look good, and then you come up into some scenarios that you just didn't expect, right? Because people post their good news on social media, whether it's on Facebook or Bigger Pockets or whatever. Everybody loves to deliver the good news, right? And then when it comes to the bad news, it's like when you read about the bad news, it's already too late.
Yeah.
And so for that first time passive buyers, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges. And those people will eventually, they might not sell. They might stick it out because that's what they, we can't help it, right? We're
Right.
resilient. But I think it's still good because there's a good chance of increased value. But I think they're going to overpay, but not because the market is slowing down. It's because they come across situations and circumstances that they just didn't anticipate because they didn't want to pay for the right type of information. You can't sit here and say, I'm only going to pay $45 a month and expect to get thousands of dollars rate of return.
Yeah. It's just, it's interesting. I think that my opinion is there's a little bit of safety in it for that passive investor because of where the market's at and because of the product class. I think there's a couple product classes out there today that make sense. Multifamily, of course, is the sexy place to be right now to have your money sit in. It's kind of portraying that hedge against inflation. So I just think that you need to do your homework, do your due diligence, vet your sponsors, make sure that what you're doing is in alignment with what your goals are. And you said something very interesting about not really knowing knowing what, if you're a first-time buyer or first-time investor, there's those mistakes. But if you find somebody who's made some mistakes and you come alongside them, that can hedge you against that issue, right? And it can help you. So, hey, listen, I've made some mistakes in my past. I had somebody say to me one time, well, at least we know that you're not going to make those again. So, it kind of gives us a little edge of protection there. Hey, let's talk about something fun, man. 20 minutes of a heavy conversation is a lot, but let's talk about something fun. How come you were in Texas? And that's a long drive. California, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona. What were you doing?
Oh, I was dropping off my daughter. She goes to school in Waco at Baylor University. It's her last semester there. And instead of flying, we decided to drive.
Little daddy-daughter time?
Yeah. So we had a few days of just her and I hanging out, talking about politics, I mean, you can't help talking about with the young people, and especially with kids or college age kids. And they're gonna because of their lack of experience in life, they're gonna have some opinions that you're gonna disagree with.
What's funny is I grew up in an era where you didn't talk about religion and you didn't talk about politics. Today I talk about religion. I talk about my belief. You brought it up at the beginning this morning that you're a Christian, and I still don't talk about politics, though. I just won't. I don't want to go there and express my opinion, or go ahead, express yours if you want. But it just, I think it's a sensitive area still.
It's really sensitive, but I think one of the keys, Mike, for anybody who likes talking about it is understanding that it's okay for someone to disagree with your opinion.
Yeah, it is, right? Absolutely.
And I think that if someone is so set on wanting somebody else to change, why would you put yourself in that situation?
Yeah. Hey, sometimes it's like this. I live in Chicago. And you might be able to relate to this where you are, but I live in Chicago and we have the Cubs and the White Sox.
That's right.
It's the same type of split. I'm a White Sox fan. I'll give you that all day long. So, hey, Michael, let's favorite thing that you saw between San Diego and Waco.
Well, that's a lot of the United States to see.
Yeah.
I would say the favorite thing that I really appreciated on my entire drive was the amount of love by people. I really
Wow.
expected to see, I really expected to see, the anti-mask movement or the mask or the pro-mask or whatever, and people kind of be grumpy or whatever, but as we traveled and stayed in hotels and went to stores and restaurants and stuff, the amount of friendliness and the smiles that I would see between San Diego to Arizona to New Mexico, because my daughter has an electric car that we got her, and so we had to fill up every 180 miles, and so seeing the people and talking and having conversations with people and people having the openness of that provides a lot of confidence and faith for me back into the American people. And I'm just so, of course, you see some amazing landmarks and landscaping and stuff like that too, but I'm just in awe of how awesome we are as people. Restores my faith back into humanity to see smiles and friendliness. People open doors for each other and going out of their way to pick up things and help people out. Can I do that for you? What do you want? And I think that's what provided me with a lot of awe for me this past weekend.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, how about any place fun that you stopped and ate along the way that was a little unique or?
My goodness. No, it was kind of a boring thing. There was a truck stop that we in mid Texas, it was near San Angelo. And we just got some fried catfish, fried chicken, and some fried foods as I would expect in the South. And it was the middle of nowhere, and I'd never seen so many stuffed animals, and I'd say like stuffed bear, stuffed antelope, stuffed like game animals inside of a truck stop in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
And it was a two-lane highway, but it was. And it's the second time I've stopped over there. It was good. It's good fried food. I don't even remember the name of it, but it was interesting and it was a lot of fun and it was good fried chicken.
Yeah. So there you have it. If you want fried food outside of San Angelo, hey Michael, tell people how they get a hold of you if they want to talk to you about economics, the economy, or getting a mortgage for a piece of real estate.
Sure, no problem. They can call me. I'm in San Diego, California. And they can call me at 619-889-8817. And that's my personal cell phone number. It's not a Google voice line or anything. It's my real cell phone number. And they can actually text me because I think it's frustrating when you make a phone call and you don't get that person. But because I'm on the phone so much, or I have dedicated times where I'm actually working, the best way to get a hold of me is via text.
Nice. Hey, Michael, I'm going to move you down to the green room. You want to spend a few minutes with me backstage when we're done?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here this morning. I appreciate you. Hey, everybody, there you have it. Spent some time this morning with Michael Zhao from Hometown Mortgage and talking about the economy and the state of the economy, some deep economic opinions and thoughts about where we're going. Listen, if you like this content, we're here every Thursday morning, always have a different guest, a different subject, 20 minutes of just a morning shot in the arm, Thursday morning live, 8:30 Central Time every Thursday morning. Hey, go subscribe, like it, love us, and you'll get notified when we pop up or when we're coming on. But I always look forward to bringing good content to you. If you're looking for passive investing opportunities or a little bit of education, how do we help you do that? If you are looking for vendors or services, hey, we'll open up our database to you. So love to meet with you and network. Don't hesitate to reach out if I can answer any questions or be of any help. Thanks and have a great week, everybody.